Hey guys, I am going to run through the first three questions on a migration past paper for you today. I know the migration exam is coming up, and lots of you have found the migration videos really helpful. So hopefully this will help you prepare for your exam next week. So we're going to start with the first question, the sources question. So it's going to say, study source A from the source booklet. How useful is source A to a historian studying something? Now, in this case, it's asking about Britain and the scramble for Africa. And you need to notice that in the question, it reads, explain your answer using source A and your contextual knowledge. Now, it's really, really important. And the biggest mistake people make in this question is, first of all, you must directly address the source. So what that means is you're either quoting from the source or you are saying explicitly what you see in the source. And then you are linking that and defending it with real contextual knowledge. Now, the quality of your knowledge will really make a difference between whether you're kind of hitting the 4, 5, and 6, or if you're able to get into the 7 and 8. So hopefully the structure that you might have watched in my structure video, and then also what we run through today will help you really feel confident with this question. So when you receive the source, and I've taken this from a past paper, you will have the source itself, either written or image, and you'll be given the provenance. Now, provenance covers the nature, what the source is, the origin, where it's come from, and the date it was produced, and the purpose. Why was it made? Okay, and all of those things can be assessed for usefulness and limitations. Although I would always recommend you go for usefulness over doing limitations, unless you're absolutely stuck and you really are struggling. The reason I recommend this is because it's always easy to get marks when you talk about usefulness. When you talk about limitations, there are some loopholes that examiners are supposed to look for. You can't talk about anything that's not there. You can't say, for example, this is at least for AQA. Some other examples are different in this respect, but for AQA, you cannot talk about this isn't there, therefore this is limited. It hasn't presented this, angle. You won't get credited for that. So it's much safer because anything you say about use, as long as it makes sense, will definitely be credited. So I would always recommend, if possible, you go and you talk about use if you can. If you struggle, or if you have a really good idea that follows something that they're misrepresenting that you think is a good idea, then I think limitation is fine. So the first thing we're going to look for is the nature. So what is this? Now, quite clearly you can see this is a cartoon, okay? So that's interesting already for us as a historian. Then we're going to look for origin. So who wrote it? When was it made? In this case, it was published in 1911 by an American magazine. So already you're thinking about the scramble for Africa and America. Was America involved in the scramble for Africa? You should be questioning. What perspective do they have? Why might they be publishing a source on this? And if you have any ideas, even at just the reading stage, jot them down on your past paper, sorry. And finally, purpose. So mostly cartoons are going to probably be trying to make either a very explicit, very obvious political point, or they're going to be funny, humorous, or what we would call satire. A satirical cartoon, satirical satire, same definition, just different ways of using the word, is something to be funny. It's supposed to be funny. So in this case, this is a American magazine which used humor to make a political point. So they're doing both things. They're making a political point, probably about the scramble for Africa, maybe about empire, and they're also trying to add some humor to it. And this is our provenance. So we're already thinking, okay, a cartoon, is that useful? Why? What's that going to tell us? American point of view, satire, political purpose, and the artist was born in Scotland and has moved to America. Can that tell us anything as well? Just to recap, nature, cartoon, origin, American perspective, 1911, political point, and purpose, making a political point with some humor about the scramble for Africa. Now, when we're assessing provenance, provenance is probably, well, harder in one sense because you have to try and think about why what the source is useful to us. And what I would say is always try and find a use. Now, if something is completely wrong, untrue, false, it's still very useful. For example, if this cartoon is presenting completely incorrect facts, then we can learn something about what the American public believe or what they're being told. If you had a different context, you had a source about Jewish or Irish immigration, if you're looking at that topic, and the source was very nasty. So we might use the word xenophobic or racist. Xenophobic meaning a dislike of foreigners, racism obviously being against people of a different race. Then we can learn that people at the time had strong feelings about people from different countries. We can learn people might have been going through difficult times, because often feelings of racism or feelings of xenophobia or dislike for other people rises when times are more difficult. So you can always learn something from a cartoon or a source, even if it's completely incorrect. So in this case, the fact it's a cartoon, we're going to think about the fact that a cartoon is only one person's perspective, okay? But you would not draw a cartoon that nobody wanted to look at. So it's going to probably express a popular opinion. In terms of the origin, America themselves weren't involved in the scramble for Africa, and they had also been colonized themselves, as you would know from earlier in the course. They've had their own history with slavery and racism. And all of these things are going to impact the presentation of this cartoon. Now, if you also have some wider contextual knowledge, you might know that America traditionally have been quite opposed to empire colonization. They've quite often advocated for self-determination, which is where countries rule themselves. So for all of these reasons, we might want to look towards America being more critical of countries like Britain and the other European countries that were kind of trying to colonize and take over Africa. But then we have that intricate detail that shows your nuance, your holistic, your whole understanding that actually America itself has had a history of racism, particularly with people being brought forcibly over from Africa. And obviously in America in 1911, there are still huge problems with racism and divides and segregation in society. So both of those things point us towards why this cartoon is useful. On the other hand, we can also take from the fact that this has been published at all, the fact that this shows the world was interested. If, America is very far away from both Africa and from Europe, and they are choosing to publish, and therefore people are choosing to consume, to read, to look at political cartoons, information about something going on in completely the other part of the world. So again, it shows us people cared. Now, in terms of the content part of the question, so that's one half, the provenance. Now, in terms of the content, we're going to look for three things. What do we see with our eyes? That's what I was saying about earlier. You must explicitly talk about the source. So what do you see? What does it suggest? What does it tell you? What does it mean? And what do you know, your knowledge? Now, some people skip the what do you see and go straight to the suggest. The source is showing that lots of countries invaded Africa. Okay, you've missed the fact that you're not telling me about the fact that the source shows lots of people with different countries' flags walking into Africa as a continent. Okay, this suggests that lots of people invaded Africa. It's really important you do those two parts. Otherwise, you're not hitting the mark scheme requirement for referencing the source directly. In terms of things we can talk about, so as I said, we've got lots of different flags all being dotted around the continent of Africa. So that's one thing we might want to pick up on in terms of what it's telling us. We've also obviously got a large character in the middle, described as a large man in the center, representing Africa. We might want to think about how he's been presented. So he doesn't look very happy. He looks very exhausted or tired, or, all his energy's been taken from him. You could also interpret this as he looks like he maybe has been captured or he's been weakened. All of these things are important. We've also got lots of people who are trying to kind of take bits away from Africa. So you've got someone carrying off the A of Africa. You've got someone who looks like they're kind of drilling into the land, settling, destroying, taking it for their own. So what I would then do is, so obviously in the actual exam, you're going to be doing this really fast, but we've got our three points here. You only really need two, but 3 points about what I've seen, and they're the three things I've just talked through. So we've got men from different European countries putting down flags all over Africa. The African man is helpless and is not doing anything to stop the Europeans. He's shown to be sick with sleeping sickness. So again, that's not us expressing an opinion that he's not doing anything. That's us using the source, using the provenance, saying what we see. Now, when we think about whether this is factually accurate or not, that's a different matter, okay? And then finally, all the decisions are being made without participation from Africa or the character in the middle. When we think about, therefore, what this means, so what does this suggest? Well, the fact that we see men from different European countries putting their flags down suggests that European countries such as Spain, Britain, France, and Turkey fought over land in Africa in a race to grab as much land as they could claim for themselves. Then we're thinking about, is this true? So I know from my revision that Britain claimed 16 colonies that stretched from Egypt to South Africa. I also know that France and Belgium claimed land in the West. Now, if you look back at the source, you'll see there are far more British flags than there are any other nation. So you also might want to pick up on that fact, and you can use the evidence that Britain claimed 16 colonies as evidence of their kind of success in Africa. I'm going to skip to the bottom one now. So all the decisions are being made without participation. Africa, this suggests that Africa was being exploited and was not part of the agreements or consultations to split the land. Exploited means being taken advantage of. My knowledge, in the winter of 1884, a conference was held in Berlin where decisions were made about who could take what land. Little consideration was given to the understanding, needs, or wishes of Africans themselves, based on divisions in their language, culture, and traditions. So these decisions were made without their participation. This happened so many times throughout all of history where decisions have been made by certain countries about other countries. And so I think in both of these cases, we can say that this source is very useful to us because it's presenting factual evidence that we know to be true. Now, the middle one I've put in blue because this is more of a limitation, because actually the source is presenting here some slightly incorrect information. What we would take from the point that the man that represents Africa is shown to be kind of having sleeping sickness might suggest to us that Africa didn't really fight back. However, we do know that actually Africans did fight back to defend their lands, but they were trapped in often a very unfair fight due to the European access to kind of weapons like guns, particularly the Maxim gun. We know there were African victories, such as the Zulu War in 1879 and resistance by the Boers. So you can definitely write this point if you want to, because you're suggesting the source is limited to you because it has misrepresented information. And that's how I would answer that one. So you can literally just put some sentence starters. The source shows, column 1. This suggests, column 2. This is useful because, column 3. Right, question 2. Explain the significance of British rule in India. So a significance question. Now, I think these questions are really, really easy to answer well if you know your structures and you have some prior thinking of your plans. So we're looking for short term and long term. 1 paragraph short term, 1 paragraph long term. I've just jotted down for you here what I would try to focus on. So short term, we're thinking about significant. Significant means change. Anything that changed could be good, could be bad, okay? All of these points I've taken from mainly the textbook for the course. I've also done some research, extended research to find some of the other ones. You don't I'm not suggesting in any way that empire was good or bad. I'm not expressing my opinion. I'm just sharing ideas that you could write about in terms of things that changed because of the British in India. So empire created jobs for Indians and the British in shipping, transportation, and sales. British businessmen, merchants, and traders took Indian raw materials and sold them in Britain. The tea trade was worth 30 million a year. In addition, industrialization took place, which provided jobs for local Indians in factories. Now, obviously, those jobs were often very poorly paid. Most of that trade was the financial aspect was going to the British. For the GCSE level, you don't really need to go into that. The fact that it changes means it's significant. Improved farming. So Britain introduced irrigation to the countryside. Irrigation is digging tunnels and trenches for water to flow through the fields, which increased the available farming land by 8 times. Again, we would pick up on the fact that most of that farming land was then used for cash crops like tea and items they could sell at a high price rather than food, which then led to famine, which we're getting to later. Improved health. So Britain introduced a vaccine and treatment program to fight diseases like malaria and smallpox. They also improved sewage systems and water supplies, which increased life expectancy. Linking back to the idea about farming, we can also talk about how in the short term, there was a devastating famine. The emphasis of Britain on high value crops like cotton, tea, and oilseeds meant there was a famine in the late 1800s where millions of people very sadly died. So you can always take these points a little bit further. Think about what the impact of this might be, because the point of this question really is to explore change and impact. What I've done is I've highlighted for you the significant point in blue and any detail in red. So you can hopefully see there how you kind of take maybe a 5 out of 8 to kind of an 8 out of 8 with that really high level specific knowledge and detail. Just an idea on how you might write this up. So I've given to you a model paragraph. Please feel free to pause the video and have a look at that for yourself. But essentially, we're wanting to use a sentence structure that keeps returning to the word significance. So you can see that my topic sentence, my opening sentence, British rule in India was significant in the short term as it created jobs. That's my point. Then I'm going into the for example, and I'm giving my specific example. And then I'm linking back with my analysis, the green bit. This was significant because, okay? And then I've repeated that. And I've actually done it here 3 times over. You only really need 2, but obviously the more you can do, the better. You've got to think about what's possible for you in the time limit you've got, because as we all know, history exams are rushed. Long term. So if we're looking at the long term of the British presence in India, we can think about things like the development of coal mining. So today, India is the 2nd largest producer in the world after China of coal. If you're worrying about how do I know if things are short term or long term, you can think about whether they impacted for kind of the immediate 1 year, 5 years, 10 years. I'd probably put all of that into short term. And then anything that's longer, kind of 100 years, 50 years today, that's long term. So I'd really try and link your long term points if you can to kind of the present. In a lot of cases, you can do that. For example, if you're thinking about the Vikings, you could think about how our days of the week still link in the long term to the Norse gods. So Thursday, Thor, Friday, Freya. That's a very obvious long term significance point because it's still happening today. In terms of transportation, the British built over 30,000 kilometres of railways, 130,000 bridges, important for the development of India over time. The British invested £400 million by 1914, and today the Indian Railway employs 1.6 million people and is one of the biggest employers in the world. So if you see what I've done, I've taken the idea that they built railways. I've then done a little bit of research online about the railway system in India, and I've found some really useful facts that the railway system is a really important employer in India. Now, obviously, I understand you cannot, I would never want to attribute that to Britain solely. However, for the purposes of the GCSE, if we're looking at a slightly more simplistic understanding, which is what you need to do for this question, we can link the fact that Britain invested in railways, railways became important, and railways are still important today. We've also got many long-term cultural changes, the legal system, lots of people studying in Britain, and you can also think about the Indian independence movement and how British involvement, interference, colonization obviously led to a lot of the movements for independence, you know, both from the Hindu and the Muslim movement, Jinnah and on the Muslim side, and Gandhi on the Hindu side. And you've got, you know, both of those groups wanting independence. Again, I've just done my colours for you there. Right. Third question. 2 ways in which migration to Britain in the 19th century and migration to Britain after the Second World War was similar. So I think this question can be seen as quite daunting. I think it can be very, very difficult. What I'd always recommend doing before you start, make a mini plan. Okay, so I've always recommended look at cause, events, and outcome. Think about 2 of those that you can compare. So they're not all going to be similarities. Sometimes they might be really explicitly different, then don't choose that one. But you should be able to, otherwise I don't know why they'd ask the question, you should be able to find 2 of those 3 that are the same. Now, when you find them, and the way to find them, jot down on the side of your page the cause of one event, the cause of the other event, and same for events and same for outcomes, and you should be able to notice some similarities. So I'm thinking this is a specifically difficult question because it doesn't really tell you what you're looking for, but I know from my revision that migration to Britain in the 19th century is really looking at Irish migration, Jewish migration, and then after the Second World War, we've also got migration from Cyprus, Kenya, Uganda, and we've also got the migration after partition. So I'm looking at cause, event, and outcome. I'm jotting down at the side of my page. This is obviously very detailed. You don't need to do it this detailed in the exam, but I'm doing this for our learning purposes. Causes. So Irish migration, people moved because of the potato famine, the Blight, and I've given some details. Jewish migration, people moved to escape persecution. Now, for this course, you might want to think explicitly when you think about movement and migration about whether people are being forced to leave or whether people are choosing to go. Are they being pushed out or are they being pulled in? Okay. And I can immediately see in both of these cases, these are people being forced to leave because of different but similar reasons. Both of these are forced migration. So now I'm thinking, is it the same in migration after the Second World War? So I'm thinking about Cyprus. There was a violence between Turkey and Greece. That's forced migration. India and Pakistan, violence during partition, forced migration. And in Kenya and Uganda, racism and persecution, again, forced migration. So all 3 of these examples also have forced migration. So I can definitely use this as my first paragraph, my point of comparison. Now, I said this was a difficult question. It is because you've got so many different things you could talk about. You can also twist this and see this as a positive and think that's really good for me because I've got lots of opportunities to try and remember some of these things. You don't need to remember all of them. You could touch on a couple of them, whatever you can remember, whatever you can get done. And that's where I'm going to stop today. So hopefully that's been helpful for you. Good luck in your exams, and I will try and film another video shortly.